Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. And before we get started, Chris, we have a message from our partners at Birch Gold. The global upheaval caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the crippling sanctions on Russian trade are showing to have massive ripple effects across the world, including right here in the U.S. And it's not just at the gas pump. Food prices are soaring right now. To quote President Biden with regards to food shortages, it's gonna be real. Friends, inflation continues to skyrocket. As the dollar becomes worth less every day, transition some of your nest egg to something of worth. Gold and silver from Birch Gold. That's right, Birch Gold will help you convert an IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered account in gold and silver. Get started right now. Text RON to 989898. With thousands of satisfied customers and an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, Birch Gold can help you protect your savings. Text RON to 989898 to get a free info kit on gold. There is no obligation to get this information. Text RON to 989898 to protect your savings with gold. Very good. Chris, what do we have today for our program?
Well, Dr. Paul, it turns out that the central planners are not doing so well in managing the economy, which, as we all know, at least over here, that it cannot be done. But we'll report on what they do and the results they're getting. Now, we know that the economy has been in bad shape for a long time. Since 2008, they've tried to paper over the disaster that they created prior to 2008. And they made it look like everything is fine. But we noticed, I think it was yesterday, that the government's GDP, which is a bad statistic because it counts government spending as a positive, and government spending is not a positive, it's a net negative on the economy. A vast majority of it is waste and a burden on society, but they count it as a positive. But even government's GDP number is showing a negative Q1, which means one more quarter, and by their definition, we're in a recession. So we are facing an economic contraction and soaring inflation at the same time, which is showing that the Fed's money printing stimulus is no longer having a stimulating effect. It's almost like someone who wants to stay awake and takes pills to stay awake and ups the dosage and eventually he's going to fall asleep. The stimulant will lose its effect. And that is what is happening with the money printing. So it is not, at least as of Q1, keeping the bubble afloat, which shows, Dr. Paul, as we've been saying, week after week, year after year, that managing the economy by fiddling with interest rates and counterfeiting money simply cannot work.
Absolutely correct. And, excuse me. And the Fed, and we've said it before, they're between the rock and the hard place. They're in a quandary because they're trying to do something that nobody's ever done. Be Central Economic Planning, World Economic Planner, and pretend that they know what is the right thing to do, know supply and demand, know what interest rate should be, how much money should be out there circulating, how do you distribute the money fairly, and all these things. It's unknowable, and that's why the whole system is bad. But one thing we do know when we have a monetary system like this, there's a lot of excesses built into it, and I think that's what we're seeing now in the markets. I think these excesses were expressed just this weekend when there was a tech bubble bursting to a large degree and the stocks adjusted. Just think of Amazon, gigantic company, but it still had to take a big change in value. In the last year, I think they lost $55 billion. Well, that's a bit of change. They still have a lot more, but that's part of the excesses that occur. And then also the characteristic of these kind of conditions will be shortages. Of course, the shortages that we've been dealing with lately have been a combination of the stupidity of fighting COVID and the way they disrupted the marketplace there. But it's also a natural consequence of a fiat system. I remember so clearly the day after Nixon put on wage and price controls on August 15, 1971. It didn't take a week or two to really for the market to understand and respond to what was happening. But they put on strict wage and price controls and tariffs, froze the gold window, and actually eliminated the definition of the unit of account, which was the dollar related to gold. So what I remember so clearly was how quickly the shortages occurred. All of a sudden, the replacement cost might have doubled for some people, or it was unknown, so they just couldn't replenish their services, and they couldn't sell them at the old price because that meant that you'd be giving it away because the price managers have adjusted upward. So things move rather rapidly and they're unpredictable, but that's what we're facing, and that's why the Fed is in a dilemma right now on trying to sort all this out. But they will monkey around with it, and it will be the people who suffer. And then there will be a big question, how's the dollar hold up value? It's important. The dollar maintains the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later on. But the dollar is actually pretty strong right now. But the prices are going up. It's when you're measuring the value of a currency or the dollar, people say, well, we'll look at the basket of currencies on an international currency market. And the yen has been very weak, and that explains some of it, and that pushes the dollar up. And also, there are other ways of measuring it. Ultimately, though, to me, the most important thing to look at, to measure what's really happening to the value of the dollar is not so much in government reports. It's even the CPI and the PPI is important, but that's a government report, and there's a lot of distortion there. The report that is most important is the perceptions of the consumer on their standard of living and what the cost of living is doing. And that's where the problem is. That is the ultimate test of the value of the currency. What can you buy with it? What will the people accept? And I say that is where the crisis is coming. That's where the political crisis will come from. And that's where we'll have to face it up to eventually, since they cannot manage their way out of it because they're incapable. It's not a system that can be managed because it's something that everybody has to be involved. It's the rules and regulations, the definition of the currency, and what is the unit of account. All those things are important. But no, the Congress can't just pass more laws, spend more money, and the Fed can't lower interest rates again and again and lower. How much lower can you go other than zero? This sort of thing. So that they have nothing to offer. And right now, I think the people in this country are a bit at unease. They're very uneasy about what's happening, and they will turn their anger toward the politicians. That it is correct, but the whole problem is, are they sending the right message on what the politicians ought to be doing?
Right, Dr. Paul, and you make a great point. It's what your currency can buy. When we hear about strong dollar, I think of a classroom filled with F students and one has a D and he's all happy. They're all bad students. So the dollar is bad. The others just may be slightly worse. But what matters to us in our day-to-day lives is what can we buy? And we're learning that we can buy less, especially at the supermarket, gas stations, the things that really matter to us. So, but this is what happens, and the Fed has trapped itself. We think back to, I think it was 2018, where they tried raising interest rates, and I think they got to 2.5%. Everything started to fall apart, and then they reversed course. all the way back to near zero again. And in the eyes of, what you'll find on the TV and in the papers, so-called economists, whew, the Fed saved everything. Everything stopped falling apart. But in truth, and what Austrian economists know, is no, they didn't save anything. All they did was make things worse. They kicked the can. So in between 2018 to now at 2022, there is now a bigger problem. And they will never be able probably to even raise close to 2.5% this time. I mean, are they going to raise, we just talked about the GDP, are they going to raise into a declining economy? But if they don't raise, inflation gets worse. So this is why, these people with these massive egos that think that they could rule the world, they cannot. Central planning cannot work. It's not the people involved. It doesn't matter if it's Greenspan or Powell. There is no person on earth that can do what they try to do. Unfortunately, what they do is destroy everything for the rest of us, and we all have to pay the price for their decisions.
That's absolutely true. And right now, as I see it, they're pursuing a policy where they think they can raise interest rates and restore, the confidence in the reserve currency of the world, because some people are worried correctly that this thing will get out of control. And yet at the same time, they're working real hard not to shrink the money supply, and they're connected. You can't really do this and all of a sudden say, well, we'll just direct the people and we'll interfere in the market, which they do all the time. And that's why, they're a big player, and they have this plunge protection team. They have a lot of politicians and a lot of political people and a lot of bureaucrats that can, manipulate, prices. And one thing they like to do is they will try to manipulate, both the gold and the dollar, but they usually come up short. And this is the big problem. And the dollar is going to suffer from all of this. People say, "What do you mean the dollar's doing pretty well?" Well, if you measure it against other things, other currencies, that may be true. But eventually, though, the dollar will have to be adjusted for this terrible situation. And I think more and more people every day are starting to realize, and the biggest fear I have is what it's going to do to the political system. The people who are victims, who would like to do better but don't understand economics, so they will demand more inflation. And that is not a solution, and that's how you end up with Zimbabwe and Venezuela type runaway inflation. So right now, a lot of people would like to ignore that, but ultimately it's going to happen. This is one of the reasons the founders tried to prevent this from happening. They practically begged and pleaded after they learned about the continental dollar to put into the Constitution, nothing but gold and silver can be legal tender. And we got off it during the Civil War, but went back to it. But right now, there's no easy way to get back to sound money, because there's such a political pressure on it, on keeping the status quo, because some of it is biting the bullet, and there will be some people who would suffer from the correction. It's sort of like trying to get the drug addict off the drugs. I want to get off my drugs, but I don't want to have any reaction from the removal of the drugs. And that's what people are expecting. It's impossible, and that's why you have to expect political chaos, which is raising its ugly head. And I think every day it's been a fertile field for the Marxists to raise their efforts and try to promote their options in replacement for what we've had. So we live in dangerous times with this all in mind, and it was all preventable. It's all correctable. But I tell you what, it will not be easy, because there's a lot of power people behind that know better, but they're benefiting by it. And the people I'm talking about, they're in the deep state, they're in the banking industry, the medical industry, pharmaceutical industry, the military-industrial complex. They benefit tremendously from this. So the markets are very powerful, and the market is really what finally brought about August 15th, 1971, is the government was lying to everybody, even though it was a reserve currency world. They said, our dollar is as good as gold. And it was to a degree, but everybody knew it was just temporary, especially the French. They finally said, no way, we're turning in our paper for the gold. And that is what will happen. The market will be more powerful, although there's going to be a lot of people itching to get their benefits and get away with it. But unfortunately, these situations end up penalizing and taxing, because it's literally a tax, taxing the middle class and the poor. And although we see some numbers that say, hey, maybe things aren't too bad, it looks like everybody can get a job. But if you look at the purchasing power of what's coming and what real salaries are doing, how much money is in the bank, and how fast prices are going up compared to wages, that's the big problem. Wages never keep up with the cost of living going up, and that's where the real tragedy is.
Very good, Dr. Paul. I will finish up. When central planners fall apart, and it has happened so many times, it's ugly and nobody wants to go through it. But the falling apart process is actually the cure. That's how you get back to normality and reality. And I don't want to go through it. I'm sure Dr. Paul doesn't either, but these choices are out of our hands. We know that the costs of building and maintaining an empire it always becomes unsustainable. Unfortunately, we live in an empire. That decision was made well before any of us were born. Now we're dealing with the consequences. With each passing day, the costs of maintaining an empire from all angles constantly increases. The problems constantly increase. We see students, they want forgiveness of trillions of dollars of loans. Well, who's going to cover that? The banks or us? And then you have all the bank bailouts and the Wall Street bailouts and corporate bailouts. The problem with the people that want to control the world is the people start to believe it, and they want bailouts and to always be taken care of, and it cannot be done. So when the economy appears okay, people overlook this stuff. They deal with their daily lives, but it just appears okay. But once everything starts coming down, now the government and the Fed and everybody else, they have to face an onslaught of all these people that have become dependent on them and have believed all their lies. And it just cannot be maintained. The Soviets showed what happens. When there's problems, everything becomes local really fast. People start focusing on their local situations and don't care about the big empire anymore. So freedom is far superior to this big centralized power control. There is no perfection in this world. There is no perfection with freedom, but at least the fires are localized and they're decentralized. When you have this one big monolith, everybody has to go down with the ship. And that's why we're always advocating for liberty, because it would be much, much, much better than this.
Very good. Under conditions like this, frequently they will lead to war, and we have found our neat little war over in Ukraine, and the military-industrial complex continues to make big bucks, but there's always the increase in threat of war the longer these conditions last, and I think that's what we're facing. But there was an article today, today's paper, that showed that there was a significant event where it was noted that Russia sold some coal. Oh, big deal. They sold coal to China and took yuan for it. They didn't go into the international financial markets and use dollars. They say, that's one little deal. We're not going to worry about that. But there are others who say this is the beginning of a trend where people will start weaning themselves off the use of the dollar, which means that people who have been suspicious about the dollar losing reserve status, I think they have a legitimate concern. I don't think that means that next week everything's going to implode, but I think they're sowing the seeds truth for that, and when it comes, we'll be involved with a lot of subjective matter, people making mistakes, and who knows what. But this is definitely, I think, interesting because people around the world are sick and tired of us throwing our weight around militarily and then controlling the financials market and putting on sanctions on everybody. And already, even with the shipment of coal, we were into action right away. We just talked this week with Daniel about, you know, the destroyer, U.S. destroyer for the fourth time going through the Taiwan Straits, for no good reason other than to antagonize and include that with another threat, saying to China, if you start dealing with Russia, you better watch out. We're going to do this and this and this. And hopefully it's just talk and all, but it's very, very dangerous talk. Once again, the monetary system, the economic system is always closely related, you know, to the warmongering that goes on. And this is why there's a belief that I endorse, is that the more control you have on trade, the less free trade that you have, the more likely is you'll be fighting. And right now, and the founders, I believe this too, that if you had more trade with people, you would fight with them less. But that's not the direction we've been going in, because, you know, 10, 15 years ago, it would have been obscene. And the economists of the world would have been embarrassed, say, oh, what we need are a lot more tariffs, a lot more sanctions. But now they go along with it because of the conditions that are difficult to handle, that is a consequence of us spending money, printing up the money, and doing this. But I do want to make one point about, I think it's a fallacy. Because right now, you know, gold is at its peak. It was at $2,000 not too long ago, but it took a hit, and it coincided with the announcement that the Fed was going to raise interest rates. Who knows? Real interest rates versus what they say and do, it's a different story. But the understanding by the marketplace is that interest rates are rising, and they have risen a short time. And there's this belief that rising interest rates will take money out of gold and put it in something that you're going to earn interest. Well, they're not earning that much interest, and I really don't believe that to be an absolute or a true statement, because I remember so clearly in the 70s we watched this very carefully, and at the beginning gold did respond to higher interest rates, and it seemed like it was going to hurt gold. But through the 70s, gold started at $35 an ounce. It went up to $800 an ounce and 21% interest. So with interest rates skyrocketing, the gold market was responding by going up rapidly. And so a lot of that has to incorporate the concept of the subjectivity of pricing. The pricing is done by not only the factual numbers that you see, but how people are going to respond to it. But I don't think there's an absolute, say, as soon as the interest rates go up, people will all leave gold. I just don't believe that, because we have about 6,000 years of history on how gold works and why people accept it. So anyway, the ultimate test and the ultimate solution to all these problems, as far as I'm concerned, is less government. Government, when it's maintained by so many people who don't have liberty at heart, and they may go with good intentions, but so often they change their mind. Because in a truly free society with sound money, understanding of property rights and contract rights, believe me, things would be a lot better off. And it's not hard to understand. It will become a necessity. The big question is, are we going to wise up? Will the people open up their minds and say, you know, maybe this freedom stuff is pretty good? But now they distort words, they destroy language, and freedom is slavery, you know, this sort of thing. But it's out there. Truth can be known. The nihilists who say, you can't even know truth, so we'll make it up as we go along. That has to be the thing we cancel. That particular idea, that is total foolishness. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.